Elden Ring never tells you anything directly. It buries its history in the things you carry. 10 weapons, 10 fragments of a shattered world, and by the end you'll understand why a sword can grieve harder than any cutscene ever could. Start with the Grafted Blade Greatsword, because it's one of the first legendary weapons most players ever hold, and almost nobody stops to ask what it's actually made of. You get it from the Leonine Misbegotten at Castle Morn, a boss who's really just a symptom of a much older wound. The description calls it a revenger's weapon, burdened with oceans of anger and regret, and says a lone surviving champion from a country now vanished was so determined to keep fighting that he claimed the swords of an entire clan of warriors and fused them into one blade. That's the story as it ships in the final English version, and on its own it's already unsettling. A nameless hero from a nameless dead nation, melting down a whole clan's worth of grief into one weapon he could actually lift. But there's a wrinkle here that most players never encounter, because it only survives in translations most of the audience never touches. The earlier Chinese and Korean localizations, the ones that shipped attached to version 1. 00 before the item text got its final pass, describes something noticeably different. In those versions, the sword is made from the blades of warriors who once served Godfrey himself, and is explicitly imbued with the power of the rune of grafting, the same grafting that turns men into monsters, like Godric the Grafted. That's not a small discrepancy, and it's worth sitting with for a second, because it suggests an earlier draft of the game's history where this weapon was tied directly to the first Elden Lord's fallen retinue. Soldiers who presumably fought alongside Godfrey before he was stripped of his grace and cast out of the lands between entirely. If that early draft is closer to some original intent, then the lone surviving champion of the final text might actually be a soldier who watched his entire chain of command get erased when their king fell from power, and instead of following him into exile, chose to stay and keep fighting under a banner that technically no longer existed. The final localized version pulled back from that specificity, swapping it for something vaguer, a nameless champion, a nameless vanished country. Maybe because tying it too directly to Godfrey complicated a story the writers wanted to tell later. Maybe just because ambiguity reads better in isolation. Either way, you're holding grief regardless of which draft you believe. You're holding a sword built out of other swords, which means every warrior who died wielding one of its component blades is somehow still in there, still fighting, still furious that the fight never actually ended for them personally. The weapon skill even makes you swear an oath to a clan you'll never meet, and for a few seconds you become stronger, purely because of vengeance that was never yours to begin with. Castellan Edgar at Castle Morn warns you specifically that this sword must never fall into misbegotten hands, which tells you the misbegotten themselves probably understand exactly what they'd be reclaiming if they ever got it back, and why that would be dangerous. Then there's Mohgwyn's Sacred Spear, which might be the single most theologically upsetting weapon in the entire game, and that's saying something in a setting built on divine cannibalism. It's described as the Trident of Mohg, Lord of Blood, a sacred spear that will come to symbolize his dynasty. And it's not just a weapon, it's an instrument of communion with an outer god who bestows power upon accursed blood. The line that follows is the one that sticks. The Mother of Truth desires a wound. That outer god is the Formless Mother, sometimes called the Mother of Truth, an entity Mohg apparently found deep underground, long before he ever became Lord of Blood. She's never physically present in the world you walk through. She's omnipresent instead, reachable from anywhere, which is exactly what the spear's weapon skill demonstrates when you use it. Tearing open some kind of dimensional wound and stabbing through it 3 times to summon explosions of blood, regardless of what's actually standing in front of you. One detail that rarely gets mentioned is how Mohg could perceive her at all. One of his omen horns grew inward instead of outward, piercing through his own skull and through his right eye socket. That deformity, the thing that should have made him a monster to be hidden away like every other omen, is arguably what let him see something no one else could. His curse became his communion. There's a broader pattern here too, one that extends past Mohg specifically, long before he ever built his dynasty in the palace that now bears his name. A subjugated tribe living somewhere called Prospect Town apparently discovered the Formless Mother during the ravages of some earlier war, and she offered them a version of the same bargain, transforming them into what the game calls blood fiends. Those blood fiends used their own sacred spears to commune with her, meaning Mohg didn't invent this practice so much as inherit or rediscover it, adapting an older, more scattered faith into something organized enough to found a dynasty on. It also means the Formless Mother's reach long predates any single demigod's ambition, which fits everything else the game implies about outer gods generally, that they're patient, that they've made this exact offer before, many times, to many different desperate people. And they'll keep making it long after any particular worshipper is gone. And it's hard not to notice the resemblance to Formless Eden from Bloodborne, another blood-obsessed, nameless, ever-present entity that grants power to those willing to bleed for it, right down to the shared word in the name. Whether that's intentional world-building, a deliberate echo meant for players who've made the connection, or just Miyazaki and his team returning to a well they clearly find compelling, the spear itself doesn't care either way. It just wants a wound. And in a world built on demigods desperate enough to try anything, it's going to get one eventually, one way or another. The Hand of Malenia deserves its own kind of reverence, because it's not really a sword at all, not in the traditional sense. It's a blade built directly into her prosthetic arm, consecrated so that it resists the same scarlet rot that's been eating her alive since childhood. Think about what that actually means. Malenia lost that arm to the disease she carries. The same disease she'll eventually detonate across an entire region, and instead of grieving the loss, she turned the wound into a weapon. The description calls it her war prosthesis, and says it symbolized her victories, that some people claim to have seen wings when she raised it aloft, wings of fierce determination that have never known defeat. That's not metaphorical fluff. Her actual combat form manifests literal wings made of rot and hair when she unleashes her full power. So the flavor text is describing something people genuinely witnessed and mythologized in real time. There's a quiet tragedy sitting underneath all of that confidence though. Her brother Miquella designed a separate item for her, the gold unalloyed needle, meant to ward off outer gods entirely and to hopefully slow the rot eating through her body. It didn't work, not permanently. So the Hand of Malenia is a monument to her greatest strength and her most defining weakness at the same time.